I was really surprised by the number of older people that I talked to that brought up that very issue. And I can't remember what was going on right now that made it relevant, but I like there were a lot of older people who either used gummies or smoked.
Well, so now we've got to talk about the property rights question here, because people who live in apartments have the right, I think, the right to be free of cigarette or marijuana. My next guest, she's a regular at this table. She's one of the sharpest free market voices in Missouri, maybe the country. She works with AFP here in the Show Me State. She fights for lower taxes, womp womp, lighter regulation, womp womp, and a government that stays out of our living room, womp womp womp. Spoiler alert, this has been a rough year. Find her on X at Rare Camellia, the lovely Camellia Peterson, all the way from Orlando, Florida. She wouldn't miss an appearance. Hi, CJ.
Good morning. So I stepped outside this morning. I took a deep breath. I did not get real high, but I did scream at the top of my lungs, "What's going on?"
Now, I don't think weed, I think Florida is one of the rare exceptions. I don't think weed is not legal in Florida, is it?
Well, it may not be legal, but you still smell it plenty because just last night at dinner, like a car drove by. We were sitting outside. I know, like eating. That was, I don't know if that was smart or not, but we were sitting outside eating and a car drove by. We're like, a little contact high there.
So this morning we're going to talk about how the fastest growing crowd that's lighting up is actually the senior citizens, which doesn't really surprise me. Some of us predicted that would happen, that a lot of the generation of people who were the most against legalizing it were the people who were going to need it the most with their aches and pains. So talk to us about this trend. The fastest growing groups of cannabis users in the country, senior citizens. Shocking, not shocking?
I mean, it's gone up by like 40% in the last 2 years alone. And so it is, I don't know, like it's a mix. I think there's a mix of things going on here. I do think the old hippies have, come back around to, it's a lot of them, I think, probably stopped smoking or doing drugs and things like that when they had families and responsibilities, right? Not all of them, but some of them. And, now that they're in their retirement years, they're coming back to it. And it's also more socially acceptable too, in some ways, right? And so, and I also think that, some older people, when they're looking for non-pharma, ways to get relief from pain or to be able to sleep better, things like that, I think that they have started to explore this as an option, as a natural option as well. I remember when I did some work for a couple of organizations in Minnesota, and I talked to a lot of people on the phone when I was doing that, and they I was really surprised by the number of older people that I talked to that brought up that very issue. And I can't remember what was going on right now that made it relevant, but I like there were a lot of older people who either used gummies or smoked.
Well, so now we've got to talk about the property rights question here, because people who live in apartments have the right, I think, the right to be free of cigarette or marijuana smoke. But when one person's legal habit is seeping through the wall into another person's home, whose property rights win?
Right. I mean, your rights stop at the end of my nose, or, however you want to put it. And I think that is a line that we've had to talk about. It's why I think as a society, we got away from smoking in restaurants, things like that, right? At one point, like everybody was doing it, and it was like really socially acceptable and in some ways maybe almost expected. And then the negative health benefits or the negative health impacts came out, and it really started to decrease. Plus, people were tired of smelling. If you're not a smoker, they were tired of smelling the smoke while they were eating and tasting it, because you can taste it too. And it's the same thing with weed. I mean, when I had a little place in St. Louis in the city, I would step outside in the morning and there would be one of two things that I would smell. Either somebody was roasting coffee, which I know that sounds great, but it's not always great. But somebody would either be roasting coffee, or like the smell of weed would just permeate the neighborhood, because there was somebody there who just like hot boxed their car almost every night. But yeah, I think that that's a legitimate question.
Yeah, it's a difficult question too, because we're talking about property rights. And these are questions that, we've been dealing with for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. The question of how far, how much can you regulate people's behavior based on the, what do you call it? The negative externality that comes out of it. So there's an interesting case example of the sriracha. Are you a sriracha fan, Camellia? The rooster sauce?
I like it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that in order to manufacture sriracha, you have to have a plant that makes these fumes that will, and the sriracha fumes, these chili pepper fumes.
These are like, it's like chicken farms too, right? I mean, there's lots of places that have had these conversations around these CAFO operations that you just can't get around it, right? The smell is for, a mile surrounding it. And I don't know what you do about that because whether you live close to a landfill or whether you live close to a chicken operation, it is a good question. We dealt with this in Missouri a couple of years ago with a landfill where people didn't want it in, their vicinity, even though, some of them had moved to the area, kind of even knowing that was a possibility. But it's a good question. Like, where do property rights, where do personal property rights begin and end?
Well, when we legalized marijuana in Missouri, I have to say I had an experience a few weeks ago. We took Hazel to the public park near our house. And, there with my 2-year-old daughter, and the kids over there on the other side of the park are smoking weed, and it's blowing our way. And my daughter is having to smell it. And as someone who has advocated for the legalization of marijuana my entire adult life, I was furious. Yeah. Furious because I realized that the consequences of the legalization of cannabis meant that these kids in this public park could, with impunity, intoxicate and people who had not consented to use it. It wouldn't bother me if it was me standing outside a club and walking by. But don't you think that there's an argument to say that there should be legal restrictions in public parks where children are present?
Well, I think that's where you get into the public square discussion.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a line somewhere. We have this public, what is your expectation in the public square, whether it is about smoke or whether it is about an expectation of privacy when it comes to, flock cameras, how do we operate? And I think it's a question we have to wrestle with because, we live in a society.
Uh-oh.
but you do have to, if you're not going to have just a natural internal consideration for other people, and you think about the fact that I'm doing something in a public space, and am I thinking about how that affects other people around me? Does the state, the government have a role to step in and create those guidelines? And there's probably an argument to be made for that, right? If your tax dollars are paying for it, just like mine are, then I think we have to come to an agreement on kind of the standards for that shared space.
You Are Amalek had an interesting comment here. Let's see if I can scroll up and find it. It says that zero evidence of secondhand smoke causing cancer or serious disease. That was made up to convince the ban. Smoking in bars should have been, and clubs should have been something that was left up to the private property owner.
I agree with that.
I agree with that too. Yeah. That it should have been up to the bar owner. And you know what? It's strange. Sometimes whenever you're in the Deep South, where they don't have the smoking bans on bars and restaurants. If I go into a restaurant and I smell smoking going on at a restaurant, it doesn't make me want to leave. It actually makes me feel nostalgia. It reminds me of when you could go to a Burger King in the 80s and there'd be a smoking section and you could go there. You could smell it.
Half wall. It really, that does a lot to.
But now we got to deal with the negative secondary consequences of legalization. So the question, I guess, is when it comes to an apartment complex, if you are living in an apartment complex and the people next door to you smoke, my mother-in-law has this problem. She didn't consent to that. So, are we going to, you would think that you'd have a community that would say, we're going to not have smoking or smoking cannabis in our community, but that's not what ends up happening.
So it's probably not different than regular cigarette smoke though, right? Although we'll say, I think that probably the smell of weed smoke is more pungent than cigarette smoke, but it's not dissimilar to noise ordinances too, right? I mean, if you live in an apartment complex, do you have the right to, play really loud music after a certain time or at any time, right? Everything has trade-offs, and I often just, and it's hard for me. Well, it's not hard for me to imagine because I guess I've lived in both places. But living in the country and growing up in the country, right? I don't know how people who live in the suburbs and in apartment complexes do it, where people like me are coming to your door during election season, right? And I mean, and you do have to find a way. Your neighbors, your closest neighbor is right next to you as opposed to, a half mile away. So it's a completely different set of circumstances, and there are trade-offs to it. And I think part of the trade-off is that there are going to be some inconveniences and things that you don't like. And I do think you probably have to draw a line somewhere, but that's where we get into, that's a little subjective.
I love our audience members. St. Selma says, Stinky's Bar in Oskaloosa, Kansas became a membership club so as to allow patrons to smoke. Costs $1 to become a member. That's fun. That's funny. Let's see. What about drinking? David Lee says, as a Mormon, it bothers me when you do it next door behind closed doors. That's funny.
I mean...
Byron says it's illegal to be drunk in public, right? Or walk around with an open container. That's true.
Depends. It depends on where you are, though.
Yeah,
right?
That was the only time I ever got dragged before a judge. When I was in college, I was at a party, and it was downtown in Springfield, and they have an open container law. And my buddy had just gotten a new car that was sitting on the just right past the sidewalk, and he says, "Yeah, hey, come check out my new car." So I walk out with a freaking Bud Light in my hand, a bottle of beer, and the cops, plainclothes officers, surrounded me, grabbed the beer. They were like, "What?"
They were just waiting.
They were waiting for me, and they busted. We had to go in front of a judge, and I think I pleaded no contest and had a $100 fine. But just so stupid. It was just a way, of course, for them to do it. But then again, in Herman, Missouri, where we're going to go for Oktoberfest on October 3rd, make sure you put that on your calendar, Camellia.
Wait,
get your journal. October 3rd.
Okay. All right. I'll have to write that down.
October 3rd, Herman, Missouri. We're all going to party. But it used to be, maybe you didn't know this, but John Marsh used to tell me that Herman, Missouri used to be like a rager during the Oktoberfest celebrations because people would get drunk in public. So they actually had to commit to open container laws. And so now it's much more tame and sedate than it used to be because people used to get caught having sex in bushes and stuff because it was really bad. All of the public drunkenness down there. So open container laws, Camellia, is that a reasonable expectation for the public square?
That's an interesting question in terms of deterrence, right? What kind of laws do you create as a form of deterrence? I wouldn't really have thought about that significantly deterring public drunkenness, but I guess, if people are going to drink, and they have to stay, in a space to do it, they're less likely to be wandering the streets creating mayhem. But,
like me walking out the front door of a party. Yes.
But I don't know. I guess I would have to see the data behind whether or not the places who have done that, did it really make a significant difference? It sounds like maybe it did in Herman.
Yeah. Missouri voters legalized recreational marijuana. So, I mean, do you think that it's been an improvement? Do you think that has it been a success here in Missouri?
I mean, the policy itself has been terrible just because it's very cronyistic. As far as the number of people who are now consuming weed in various forms, I think there are downsides to it, right? There's one of the things when you talk about the hippies who are now doing weed again, weed is a lot different than it was in the 1960s and 70s, right? It's a lot stronger.
A lot stronger.
And
I've heard.
Yeah, you have heard. But I also think that there are other cultural trends that we see, this is a trade-off. There is less drinking among some of the younger people, but they're probably also utilizing weed more. But for older people too, there are risks with this because it's stronger, but also weed has a delayed effect. Like it's not like alcohol where the effect is really kind of almost instantaneous, right? Weed can have a very delayed effect. So if people consume too much, they could really be sunk later when it all hits, right? I mean, that's a real detriment. But we do see, when you talk about just full legalization, it is really detrimental for younger people. And people respond so differently to weed. Some people get like crazy paranoid, like other people, it just puts them to sleep, right? And then some people feels like it sharpens their thinking, or makes them feel more relaxed, or whatever it is. Like the effects are so varying. But I think that one of the things that we do know now, after years of the reefer madness that were overblown, but we do know now that there are some very negative impacts on young people as far as brain development and things like that if they consume a lot before a certain age.
Yeah, cannabis-related emergency room visits among seniors are climbing. Do you? Here's the problem with this is that how we always talk about youngsters being impaired and all the youngsters and all this kind of stuff. The dangerous people out on the highways are the senior citizens, from my experience. I can't tell you how many times I've almost got run over in the Hy-Vee parking lot because some senior citizen isn't checking their six. And now they're smoking weed and driving. Imagine a senior citizen, woman, Asian driver. Now, that right there, that entire demographic.
I don't know where the Asian element in this is.
What do you mean you don't know what the Asian element is?
So, like, are Asian women drivers like worse than
you never
white
seen?
women? Well, okay. Jeez.
If you're just tuning in the Wake Up America show, I'm being extremely racist. My friend Camellia Peterson on the Wake Up America show. Some stereotypes exist for a reason. Welcome. If you're not having fun, then don't click the like button. But if you are having fun, click the like button. And
this is one of the conversations, though, right? That we had when they were talking about legalizing, is there was this question about how will they test for it when you're driving. Right?
They're gonna come up with one. I'm sure they will. They're gonna get like out the little calipers and measure like your eyes and stuff, and then they'll have to have a special one for Asians. JJ says, "Do Asians smoke that much hash?" Not me. Not that Asian. The other Asians.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to see if there are like ethnic differences in the consumption of weed. I don't know that there are. There probably white people would probably outdo everybody else.
Can I introduce you to this thing called black people, Camellia? Have you ever heard of?
Well, I think the white folks are on pace to match everyone else, from what I've seen anyway.
Well, we'll certainly have to leave that conversation for another day so that we don't get canceled. Camellia, is there anything else that we wanted to discuss before we let you go? We talked about weed the whole time. I had a whole bunch of fun, like millennial things and stuff like that. Maybe we should save that for Thursday. What do you think?
Yeah, I do have a little bit of bad news for Thursday. I will be in the air at our show time. So.
No! Okay, Camellia. Well, then we'll have to just save it for next Tuesday. The Gen Z trends that they're tired of from millennials. We'll have to save that one for next time.
Yeah,
okay.
We should talk about Gen Z and AI next time too.
Oh, that'd be good. Okay, great. All right, Camellia. Well, we appreciate you very much. Thanks so much for coming up and hanging out with us, even though you're in Orlando, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Sorry, we'll miss you on Thursday.
Have a great day, everyone.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.